Good afternoon to both our audience here in 1701 Pennsylvania and to all those joining us virtually online. My name is Andrew Metrick. I'm a fellow in the defense program here at the Center for New American Security, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of moderating today's discussion, Speeding to Scale, Institutionalizing Defense Innovation. It's not every day that you get the chance to have a discussion on this interesting and vital topic with such an august group of panelists. By the way of introductions, before jumping into the discussion, although for most of you, I'm sure none of these individuals need introductions. All the way on my right, your left, is Ellen Lord. She served as the inaugural Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. She oversaw in that role a comprehensive redesign of the DoD 5000 series, leading to what we now know today as the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, amongst many other things. Since leaving government, she has served on a variety of boards, and most recently, she was the vice chair of the PPB&E Commission. I've gotten the chance to know her through our work here at CNAS as part of our Defense Technology Task Force, and previously she spent over 30 years in defense industry. Next to her is Mac Thornberry, former U.S. representative from Texas for 26 years. He was chairman of the House Armed Services Committee for 4 years, ranking member for 2, and also served on the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence. During his tenure, he was known for his focus on defense innovation and acquisition. And since leaving Congress, he's continued to work on these critical issues, and notably he's a member of the Defense Innovation Board. And then immediately to my right is Heidi Shue. She's the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, where she oversees the research, development, and prototyping activities across the department. This includes responsibility for storied offices such as DARPA and the DoD Laboratory System. She previously served as the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, and before entering government service, also had a career in defense industry, much like Ellen. Thanks to all three of you for taking time today out of your busy schedules to have this conversation. At this point, so much has been written about defense innovation that I feel like if we printed out all of the blogs, op-eds, various research pieces, policies on it, we could probably fill this room with paper. But to me, and the types of innovation that's most relevant to this discussion is really about improving the ability of the broad national security community to put capabilities in the hands of end users, both in times of peace and in times of war. And I really take a glass half full approach when I look at the defense innovation ecosystem. There have been successes, there have been failures. There have been periods of great progress, and there have been periods of stagnation. So as sort of a kickoff discussion, and I want to start, Secretary Shue, with you, what do you see as sort of the biggest successes to date that you would point to and want people to know about, and what do you think has been different about that process or that program?
Well, thank you so much for asking this question. I will tell you the biggest difference that I have seen, certainly throughout my career, is the focus on combatant commanders. Before, it's really service focused. So what we have done differently is when I came into the Pentagon, we stood up the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve, what's called the radar activity. Okay, the radar activity is working very closely with the Joint Staff to understand what the joint warfighting capability that's needed in a highly contested fight. Okay, and from that, from the requirements and the desires and the challenges, we decompose that into what is the critical capability we must have. We work collaboratively with all the services and industry. We identify prototype we can pull through rapidly. We establish technology readiness experimentation utilizing the National Guards in Indiana. We gave them a set of prototypes that's ready to be tested out. They are the ones, the users test it out and provide a feedback and say, this is great, this needs some more work, that didn't work, right? So that user feedback is extraordinarily important. Out of that, the next step, we went to the Northern Edge exercise, namely held by the Indo-PACOM up in Alaska. And what happened there is, once again, the users provided feedback on the military utility of these systems. And the system that was mature, we immediately go up to a Defense Management Action Group, what's called a DMAG, which is a 4-star board, to literally say, these are the product that's really ready to transition into production. Okay, so this short circuit, a lot of the development process, and I can tell you last year we took 4 major activities that literally were mature and went up to the DMAG, we got thumbs up from every single COCOM, every single service, which is unprecedented, right? And this is the type of capability we're delivering very rapidly. And I will say one other thing, this is really important. We don't want to go to any conflict by ourselves. We want to work closely with allies and partners. So as part of the TRES activity, we actually invited UK and Australia to witness what we were testing. Right after we finished, we went down to Australia to witness what they were doing, okay? And then we collaboratively are designing a technology readiness experimentation this year in Australia. So now you can see we're converging in terms of pulling our system that we have mutually developed. How can we accelerate the capabilities much faster, right? And there will be a Raider 25 exercise in Australia with UK and US all participating. So this is unprecedented. I want to give, I'm sorry to be long-winded. One more thing I want to say is AFIT. I want to say, I really want to thank the Hill for giving us the ability to rapidly provide procurement money to help small businesses to accelerate capability into production. Because typically what we do, we wait until one of your small businesses to demonstrate capability that we want, right? And then say, okay, we'll put it on POM. Well, at best, 2 years from now, well, you'll get money, right? So what we do is we, once again, work closely with the COCOMs and the services to identify what are the top things that small companies are doing that we want to pull through rapidly in low-rate initial production. I will say first year we got 100 million, we funded 10 companies. Second year we got 150 million, we funded 11 companies. And this year we got 300 million, and we have already we were in the process of pushing our contract with 17 companies. So this is exciting. If we could only get more money, I could help out more companies. Okay.
So thank you for that. You know, it was really great to see how you sort of went from Raider, which I think there's tremendous goodness in, but often it doesn't necessarily get talked about as much as probably it should be. But AppFit is really exciting, but and you're also talking about how it's being grown. I want to turn back because you were also talking about money, and that's where the Hill sort of enters this equation. And I'm curious to your perspective on the changes from the Hill perspective and how the Hill looks at this question of defense innovation, as well as the ever important question of where is the money coming from to have this degree of flexibility and this degree of speed.
You started out a while ago, Andrew, saying if you printed out all the studies done on innovation, it could fill the room. I don't think it's a question of any of us in the executive or legislative branch knowing what to do. The issue is actually doing it. And I think there are a number of promising efforts. Secretary Hsu just talked about some of them, but yet, I'll be slightly contrarian here, not change on the scale and at the pace that the adversary requires. And I'm concerned about that. So when it comes to the Hill, I'll say one hopeful sign, I think, is it wasn't really $1 billion, it was more like $600 million that they gave to DIU to take prototypes and get it fielded. The reason I'm encouraged by that is it was the initiative of the appropriators. And generally, that's not where innovation comes from. And so to have, in this case, House Defense Appropriation, not requested by the administration, put money on their own volition into trying to deal with some of the valley of death issues is a promising sign that they recognize and are willing to put some money into it. And I would say the other promising thing to me from a slightly different perspective is what the Deputy Secretary has done with Replicator. And the reason that's promising to me is she put it on her shoulders to say, I'm going to do this in this amount of time, and I'm going to make sure it happens. So she can be judged on a pass-fail basis. You don't usually see that amount of accountability at that level, and if it happens, then it can start to change the way the department operates. And that's what we need. So if it's successful, then you can give Heidi a whole bunch more money for other programs, and you can see actually things getting to the warfighter. Last point, Defense Innovation Board last summer said, it's not about the inputs. It's about the outputs to the warfighter that count. And we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and that's the ball.
I think that I'm so glad to hear you talk about that idea of leadership, especially. But Ellen, I want to turn to you with sort of two thoughts that have occurred to me thus far, which are both things I know that we've talked about. One of which is this virtual cycle that Secretary Hsu was talking about in terms of the feedback loop that happens and that iteration, as well as the role of leadership. So as someone who has been and is a leader in this space, how do you think about this sort of institutionalization from a leadership and culture change perspective within the department?
Great, thanks, Metric, and thank you to CNAS, Richard, for allowing us to talk about some of our favorite subjects here. I think you have to come with a top-down and a bottom-up approach, sort of a force function to institutionalize things. So for instance, I'll pick a functional area to go in a different vector here. I am very pleased that the department and the Hill to an extent are recognizing that most of our warfighting systems today are hardware enabled, but really software defined. And our hardware is around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, almost 60 years a lot of the time. And we need to update that with software. And through a lot of good work from the Defense Innovation Board, Beth Dobkin, who's in the audience here, led that effort from inside the building. We actually came up with some arguments that convinced the Hill to come up with a line item for software, BA8. So we had a software color of money because, you know, we're in this conundrum where most of our innovation is coming from industry, not from government, yet we're very government-centric, very inward-focused, and we recognize that if we really want to capture contemporary coding, we have to be able to develop, produce, and maintain software on a daily basis and not be constrained by RDT&E, procurement, and O&M money, and spend so much time on the administrivia. So I'm pleased that we're doing that, but what we needed was some policy to begin with that actually leveraged statute that was written. Then we had to take it and turn it into implementation guidance in the lexicon of the building to actually have people do things. So that's the top down. But we had to have individuals lean forward and embrace those authorities and move forward and have PEOs and PMs say, yes, I have the intestinal fortitude to take on something new and different, knowing there aren't an enormous number of motivations and rewards for doing risky types of things in acquisition like this, and actually begin to make a difference with moving code very, very quickly, not being constrained. And I think we need to really do this type of behavior over and over and over again. And now, because of some of the successes, we're seeing more interest in doing this in areas other than just software. So whereas I can think about a lot of things that aren't going so well, I'm very excited about the fact that we have a little bit of momentum with software, and we really need everybody to echo and amplify that success, talk about the wins we've had so that we can continue.
Thanks for bringing up software, because when we think about future capabilities, future technologies, like you said, it's so much enabled by software, but that often changes the way that we do research, we do acquisition, we do fielding. And for some it might be a four-letter word, but CJADC2 is something that we're trying to strive towards. So, and I know it's something that flows through a lot of the work in R&E. And so a question, Secretary Hsu, for you would be, how is the changes within the software space impacted the work that's going on within R&E, especially as it pertains to R&E's work on a lot of the joint enabling capabilities that span across services?
I'll give, since you brought up the example of CJADC2, I will give an example of what we end up doing to enable that, okay? About 2 years ago, Admiral Aquilino, at the time the commander of Indo-PACOM, literally said, I need joint fires network. right? That's my number one priority. Well, once he said that, I told Shotgun Brownie on my leave, say, let's lean forward, help him to solve that. Because that is networking everything together, right? It's not a simple problem. So what we were able to accomplish in 10 months is literally live constructed virtual simulation, right? That's fully informed physics-based simulation. So it's not just some hand waving, okay? This is physics-based simulation, literally to tie a realistic red versus blue conflict. This is really incredibly impressive. So we were able to literally have a site in San Diego that's tied in to another site in Hawaii to say, okay, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, let the war begin, right? San Diego played red, Hawaii played blue, and we conducted the entire day one of a conflict, right? And live constructed shoot down of actual, these are real targets we use. Obviously, we didn't kill them, but we modeled that. The model is based upon actual platforms with actual range, altitude, actual weapon loads, right? And the missiles are literally the actual range, right? Capability, all of this are real. So we conducted a complete wartime scenario for Indo-PACOM, right? And this is unprecedented in 10 months. Software was the backbone, right? And we're rapidly iterating, adding more and more capability in there. And it is informed by real live data as well as the model data that I talked about, right? So,
If I could just pull an audible here, I have to say in the CNAS Defense Innovation Task Force, the Joint Fires Network came up as a great example of using existing technologies and moving innovation forward quickly.
exactly. It was unbelievable. And everybody who's seen it has been incredibly impressed.
Yeah, Navy did a good job along with everybody else.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what this is highlighting is that we do have the tools to move with speed, but maybe there's things that we're missing. And so, Mac, I want to turn to you first on this of like, what do you, when you look at the cornucopia of things that the department and the Hill have at their disposal to use, what do you think are the missing gaps? Because you, in your first remarks, definitely hit on that scale piece. I do kind of want to draw you out of like, what do you think is missing there? And what do you think is the roadmap to achieving that?
Yeah. In my way of thinking, there are 3 pillars for innovation. One is the authorities, and I'm slightly biased probably, but most people tell me they think the authorities are in place to do what needs to be done. And a second one is culture, and we've kind of started to talk a little about leadership and incentives and ideas which come from places like CNAS. The third is funding. And to me, the critical missing piece, if I could wave a magic wand, would be more flexible funding that's available, especially when you're talking about software and AI and things like that, where the technology changes so quickly. A couple of years ago, the National Security Commission on AI recommended there be a pot of money for AI applications that you could then pursue whichever applications seemed to make the most sense at the time. And you can't know that 2 years ahead of time. I'm treading into Ellen's expertise with the PBE Commission here.
I'm just the cheerleader.
But I do think flexible funding, especially when we have adversaries and technologies that are moving so quickly, is the missing piece to help us all move faster.
So that was one of the best straight man acts that I've
Speaking
seen.
of-
Because yes, speaking of PPB&E, Ellen was one of the vice chair of that effort.
Planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, how the building gets its money.
Thank you. Sorry, Probably
You have that
worth saying.
acronym hang up. Yeah.
Yes. But I was hoping that you could tease out for us some of the really good recommendations that come out of that effort that get to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking here about today, especially around year of execution flexibility, colorless money, as well as just the ability to move at a speed that is commensurate with the threats that we face.
Absolutely, thank you. So just a little background on the PPBE Commission. It was formed in the FY22 NDAA. It was a 24-month effort that finished in March of this year. There's a great website that I'm sure everybody's going to run to now, if you Google PPBE Commission, that talks about what we did. We interviewed over 400 different groups, doing a lot of listening, because obviously there is a great deal in the literature. There have been commissions before. There's been a lot of thought around basically how do you meet this need where we are accelerating emerging technology, which is exciting and good, and we at the same time have geopolitical threats popping up around the globe on a pretty consistent basis. Yet we have a PPBE system that's literally 60 years old and is based on a way of doing business where the government basically funded and developed most innovative technology, where fast forward today, the commercial sector is the one that is developing, doing most of the innovation. How do we embrace that when our system doesn't respond to the need for speed? Essentially today, if a requirement comes up, it takes 3 years to get in the big budget. And we do have other acquisition authorities that allow you to move faster, whether it be other transaction authorities or middle tier of acquisition. We have some great groups like the Rapid Capabilities Office or the Defense Innovation Unit. However, they have never been scaled. They're sort of pillars of excellence. So we fundamentally came up with 28 recommendations, trying to be relatively concise, but I'll talk about a few of them. One is the need to link budgets to strategy, which is always the hope and expectation. But what we found through our research, and we were very lucky to have a staff of actual practitioners, financial managers, programmers, people that have actually been doing the work for 20 to 30 years, we found that the defense planning guidance was way too general. It didn't say what not to do. And that often there was this bifurcation in terms of time and sometimes focus between the defense planning guidance and fiscal guidance. So we are really advocating in many different ways for CAPE and Comptroller to work much more closely together in the same business systems so that you don't have separate systems. And there is some good work beginning to happen on this. So basically, get the guidance out there early, make it specific, and then keep updating it. Another area that we looked at, and by the way, we thought the whole process, PPBE process, is really a bit antiquated. So we think it needs to be rebranded, and it's the Defense Resourcing System. Of course, we had to come up with an acronym, so it's DRS for those that want to know. So we have a new system, a new way of doing things. We really focused on communication with the Hill as well. It's not too surprising sometimes that reprogrammings get shot down when all of a sudden there's a crisis and it didn't happen yesterday, but Congress hears about it yesterday and there's an expectation that they will act today on it. So we talk about a series of ongoing dialogues, especially with a mid-year budget update, but also transmitting information much, much more quickly in a more transparent way. So right now, the justification books that are the budget, every military service and agency kind of does it their own way. and it makes it very, very difficult for the staffers. There are also flat files that go up there. They're not searchable. They're not sortable. So we said we need a consistent series of systems that talk to one another, because data is the most valuable IP that the building has, and we need consistent J-books to go up that are searchable, sortable, and have the detail that allow the staffers to do the work, and oh, by the way, allow everyone in the building to go to really understand what's there. Because right now, there are a lot of beltway companies that make an enormous amount of money sorting through what actually is in the budget, and congressional members are paying for it, DOD is paying for it, where, you know, an industry just kind of throws up their hands half the time because it's hard. So we need to make this transparent. I could go on forever. I'll say one other thing. One of the areas we looked at was training the workforce. One of the challenges with all the different authorities that the building has, all the different policies that's been developed, all the implementation guidance, is people get into roles through whether it be planning, programming, budgeting, and again, we're kind of mushing together programming and budgeting a little bit, and then execution, and they are not trained on how to do their job. And we had people on our staff that had great examples. Our executive director actually was writing the budget for one of the services, and she was to develop the J-books, and she was given last year's J-book and said, good luck, go for it. You know, so it's a little scary, the lack of training. So we need to train, but we also need to motivate and reward people. And it's not just money, it's recognition. And all of this, in my mind, really comes down to leadership. We need leadership to understand what right looks like, what the challenges are with communicating these critical efforts between the building and the hill and back again. And we need to use modern tools, because if we want to get the best and brightest at DOD, they're not going to be wanting to work on C+ systems that, you know, they never even saw in school because it was so old. We need to update things.
I really appreciate you laying out such things in such a comprehensive but yet succinct way across a variety of different issues. Because if you looked at the full commission report, the amount of good work and recommendations in it are really quite staggering. But before I turn and open it up to the audience, both here and virtually for Q&A, I did, Secretary Hsu, want to ask you a slightly different version of the same question. But like, when you look at what you're able to achieve today, is there that one thing that you lie awake at night and saying, oh, I wish I could do that. If only I had a tool to do this from an authority's perspective. What would that one thing be?
I would say I completely concur with my colleagues, first of all, okay? We have a common shared sense of here's what's missing and here's what we've got to move quickly. Mac also said absolutely the right thing, the lack of funding in current year. If I see a threat, I want the ability to develop techniques to counter that threat. Well, all my money's already in specific PE lines, a zillion little PE lines. How do I even rewicker that, right?
One of the PPBE Commission recommendations is take all those budget line items and start consolidating them into capability elements.
Which we're trying to do right now. So thank you very much, right, for doing that. But it's absolutely needed. We need the flexibility to pivot because the threats are not going to wait, right? They're continually advancing. So if we don't have the flexibility to rapidly pivot, we're just shooting, we're tying our shoelaces together and trying to run, right? Not very fast or effectively. So that's I'm 100% aligned with you.
May I just say one more thing? One of the service acquisition executives said he has more strings around R&D money than any other kind of money. And that just blew me away, because if you thought about any area where you'd want greater flexibility to follow where the research takes you, it would be in R&D, and there's more strings on that than anywhere else. It makes no sense.
Okay, again, recommendations from PPBE. You know, there's an overarching theme of delegating more authority to PEOs and PMs. And some of the flexibilities you were asking about before, Metric, we talked about the fact that reprogramming below threshold, reprogramming limits have not increased with inflation for the last 20 years. There also is, with all CRs, it's hard to spend the budget, and it gets spent not so wisely sometimes, so it doesn't get lost in the last weeks of the budget year. We talk about a little carryover. We also talk about delegating authority within the building, essentially so that in the year of execution, PEOs and PMs can move money around. You talked about demonstrations, you talk about experiments. Well, small companies can't wait 9 months for some funding to come along. They've got payroll to meet. So we need to enable the workforce to sort of take it downrange.
Thanks for that. And again, that's one of the things that really strikes me is flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. And one of the places where I feel like the system that we have is very much one that is built up over decades, and we've built up a series of like cholesterol almost within our processes, and a lot of this is thinking about how we take that down and how we move with the speed that I think we all agree we need to.
While still allowing Congress to have oversight. So.
Exactly, because with all of this, it is a balance between the different parts of our federal system in order to maintain that correct roles and responsibilities. With that, if there are questions in the room, please raise your hand. I'll try to call on you. If there are questions of virtual, those will get fed to me via iPad. If there are no questions, we'll continue on. But I wanted to be a good moderator and open it up to the room. And please stand and introduce yourself before asking your question.
Hi, my name is Derek Bernson. I'm a Next Gen Fellow at CNAS. First, I just wanted to thank you guys a little bit. I was previously active duty, and I spent a lot of time and effort on improving defense innovation. And so I see a lot of the changes and the things that you've talked about being the difference that people have really been beating the drum for years on. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that a lot of the ideas and the genuine innovations that make a huge difference come from a lot of the junior people who are currently on active duty. And I think there's currently a roadblock in how do junior sailors take their ideas and feed that up to a PEO. I think there's a lot of ideas that are currently lost, and so I'm just curious if there's been thought from someone at your level on how do we bubble those ideas up, take those innovations, and make them reality.
I can answer. I can tell you after visiting Army Futures Command, one of the things that they ended up doing is on annual basis recruiting a cohort of very junior soldiers from across a multitude of different disciplines. Cooks, all right? Maintenance folks, don't laugh. I mean, they teach them how to write software. For literally the first 6 months, 6 to 9 months is the education, teaching them to write software. And they're coming up with incredible ideas to say, okay, my maintenance guys have this pieces of paper they gotta take with them to write everything down. Then they gotta transcribe it, right? So literally enabling them to transcribe via software and develop new processes. So they are utilizing innovation from the lowest level. I was so impressed.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish, Heidi. I was going to say, this comes back to leadership. And so as a leader, you have to realize you have extroverts who are like me, who are cutting everybody else off all the time. But then you have people who have to be invited into the conversation. And as a leader, it's incumbent upon you to go and engage with everybody, get to know them, because there is incredible experience and capability out there, but a lot of people don't have, for whatever reason, the intestinal fortitude to serve that up unasked. So you have to ask. Then in a very, very finite way, I will say the Navy has done a great job through the Naval Institute with proceedings. They have an unprecedented ability to allow everyone from enlisted all the way up to write essays and submit them, and they get published. They have a lot of essay writing contests as well. So that's a place when your voice can't be heard inside. For decades, Proceedings has been publishing.
And I want to jump in here as well to your point about the folks, at the very tip of the spear. We often think about that as the immediate warfighter, but you brought out the people who are doing vital logistics functions, they often know the problem way better than anyone else does. They know the jagged outlines of it. And that's one of the things that struck me, and through organizations like CNAS and others, I've had opportunities to go out and engage with those people at that level. And what you hear back from them to interject into these types of conversations is one of those linkages with, thank you for your question. Because that was one of the things that struck me when I looked at what's going on in Ukraine, or when I think back to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, is so much of our operational innovation was coming from the youngest of our soldiers, sailormen, airmen, and Marines. Sorry, Guardians, back then you were not yet a force. We love you all the same. I do have a question for the three of you. We're getting close to time, but one thing that hasn't come up today is Ukraine. And that might be the 10,000-pound gorilla in the defense innovation room. So, briefly, I would really be interested in the three of your thoughts on what is Ukraine telling us about our own systems and the need to move with speed and at scale.
Yeah, well, clearly, I think there's a lot of lessons learned we're taking from Ukraine. But I think the other things that was unbelievably uniting is Putin united NATO, right? Every single country there is putting a lot more focus on defense and adding a lot more money. Now, when I engage with them, it's incredible. The level of engagement and the support they're providing to Ukraine is unprecedented. I've visited a number of countries, and they're showing me, here's a system we have already delivered. And they are doing exactly what we're doing, very rapidly designing, developing platform, pushing it out, right? So I think what it has brought us a lot closer together as allies and partners, which is incredibly important, because in any conflict in the future, together, we're much, much stronger, right?
I think everybody focuses on drones, but Ukraine really highlights the importance of electronic warfare. And there have been a few people on the Hill like Don Bacon who have really pushed to do more in that area, put greater emphasis on it, and surely to goodness this wakes us up to do that. But I would say the overriding lesson of Ukraine is we've got to figure out how to move faster. Because as soon as one side will do something, the other side is quick to counteract it, and that cat and mouse game shows the speed that you can operate in under necessity. We don't have the same sort of pressure on us, and yet we still need to be able to operate at that speed, because we're a whole lot better at recovery than we are being prepared ahead of time. The problem is we're not going to have time to recover if we get into a major conflict. So I think it's speed, speed, speed again.
I really like the idea that you put there about speed and sort of the interactivity between both sides. When Dr. LaPlante was here earlier last year, it was before CNAS moved into our great new space, which seems like so long ago. He was in a fireside with Dr. Stacy Pettyjohn, the director of the defense program, and showed a great chart about how lagging munitions production has been in each conflict the U.S. ends up in. And it's very much a lagging indicator, and we can never seem to get out in front of it. And that's the piece of speed here. But Ellen, do you want to close us out with any thoughts you might have about what Ukraine can
you're
tell us?
teasing me with your munitions. I won't go there. What I think Ukraine has taught us is that commercial technology is absolutely critical, whether it be streaming video from satellites or all other kinds of sensor modalities, to all of the drones where they did have a lot of EW problems. But if the Ukrainians had not had that commercial technology, I don't believe they would be in as strong a position as they are today. And we learned through all of that commercial technology that quantity has a quality all of its own. So an 80% solution in quantity makes a difference.
Thanks for that. I think that also helps to maybe set up a panel for next year or a panel for later about the role of commercial tech within the defense space. That isn't something we necessarily dove super deeply into today, but is an important part of that. So I want to thank the three of you for a really spectacular panel, for coming, sharing your insights, and sharing your time with us here today. To our virtual and live audiences, thanks for joining us for this session. We hope you stick around, because next up we have Kate Kuzminski, Senior Fellow and Director of the Military Veterans and Society Program, and she's going to talk about some of her new research on how conscription shapes the modern battlefield. I hope you stick around. Thank you.